Good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you here and introduce Richie's public talk, starting shortly. The context of this is the Dunedin School of Medicine, which is putting this on as part of a two-day sort of research event that we're having. This day focused on our postgraduate students with a public lecture, which Richie is going to do, and tomorrow's focused on our whole school getting together to talk about our research, plan the future, and finishing tomorrow evening with our research awards, where Richie is featured previously. We're at a really interesting stage, some really fascinating things. I mean, today has been a revolution to me. I've seen all the posters from our postgraduate students, and the cutting-edge science that is happening is quite astounding. And I thought I knew it all, but I didn't. This particular lecture is actually the culmination of a series of events that's occurred from before I came to Dunedin, some 34 years ago. So 40 years ago, approximately, Patricia Buckfield was a paediatrician who actually decided to do her MD thesis during her work. And she decided she would study all the babies born and actually measure and do very careful measurements on these babies, all born in 1 year. That was it. That was what she was going to do. That led on, perhaps somewhat unexpectedly, to Phil Silver taking on a role almost year on year rather than a planned 40-year follow-up to develop the Dunedin Study and to follow these 1,000 children onwards. So the study started in women and children's health, moved to preventive and social medicine as it became more adult-focused, and is now sitting in the Department of Psychology and the Centre for Brain Health as the focus changes yet again. But it's an amazing story. It's a story I think that the whole university is very proud of, and I actually think the city is very proud of, and in fact New Zealand is proud of, because it's been remarkable in what it's been able to do. So to actually hear this evening, Richie, who's really had a really critical role over this last, I can't remember the exact number of years, it seems like quite a few, to actually get to the stage where it's got relatively secure funding, a new building within which the work can be done, and the implications of the research applying really right across the whole of our system is really a remarkable story in itself. And what we're going to hopefully learn today is how he's managed to keep in front of the curve. How do you actually keep doing this thing again and again and again when most people perhaps would have given up a long time ago? So a fascinating story this evening. Richie, welcome. And we'll certainly, or at least I'm certainly very much looking forward to what you're going to tell us.
The Dunedin Longitudinal Study has been going for over 40 years now. The study has grown in significance and impact. Researchers all over the world analyse its growing mountain of data. Founder of the study, Dr. Phil Silver, could scarcely have imagined the influence and importance the study would achieve when he launched it in 1972.
Very proud of the legacy. I think that the publications and the outputs and the influences on policy and the fact that we've got the most documented sample of human beings, large sample of human beings on the planet, that gives me a real sense of pride.
The study has published on average a new scientific paper every 2 weeks for 4 decades, and those papers are highly significant.
If I had a list of the publications these world-class scientists and scholars have generated, I could probably go on for hours.
It's probably the world's most successful longitudinal study of a general community sample ever.
It's an amazingly successful project, no question about it.
If you calculate the impact factor of the Dunedin study, it's probably the highest of any study of the behavioral sciences, and it's creeping up there in the medical sciences as well.
The study has made discoveries in virtually every area of human health and behaviour, including gene-by-environment interactions that cause violence, depression and schizophrenia, measurements in childhood that predict health and wealth in adult life, how to spot future criminals in kindergarten, and why teenagers run off the rails.
The Dunedin Study is known in our field, in many fields, as just a hallmark and landmark study. I mean, just a brilliantly conceived study, and whoever came up with the idea should be really thanked. I mean, this is a Nobel Prize-winning study.
Kia ora tātou. I wondered who would come tonight. It's a cold midweek night, and I thought there might be 10, maybe a dozen people, including Barry and Steve. So I'm a little surprised, and I'm grateful that you've bothered to come out to hear me talk a little bit about what makes the Dunedin Study special. Now, it's been a hell of a few days, hasn't it? I hope there's someone in the audience that likes sport, because I'm one of these weird academics that loves the sport. I mean, we whooped the Lions on Saturday. Great. Now, on the back of course, the Highlanders whooping them 2 weeks prior. And then some guy called Peter Burling and his team does a remarkable thing. Because the yacht racing is not about yachts really, it's about resource and power and reputation. And you take on America at your peril, and they did it, and they won. So an extraordinary moment. One I got a real thrill out of, so much so that I walked out, I was on the red eye that morning, walked out without my wallet. So I've been away for 2 days, just got back 2 hours ago, and I've been walking around saying, I've got no wallet. It's amazing who doesn't open their wallet for you in that predicament. So part of the time I was away, I attended a board meeting of Te Pou, which is New Zealand's National Mental Health Workforce Board, and one of my co-directors is a woman called Shelley Campbell, a remarkable woman in many ways. For a day job, she's the chair of the Sir Peter Blake Trust. And she walked into our board meeting on the day, and she handed out this to all of the board members. Now, I know this has been live streamed, so only the people who live stream will get to see what exactly I'm picking out of here. But it's a bunch of red socks, well not a bunch, it's 2 red socks. All right? Now, if you could see, and we all got to see, because we all stupidly like children whipped off our shoes and our socks and put these on. And people were putting their feet up on the board table at various times, twiddling their toes with their red socks on. But what it says is 1995 to 2015, Sir Peter Blake Trust. These are anniversary socks from the first time that we won the America's Cup. And Sir Peter Blake led that consortium that did what they thought then was impossible. And 20 years is small bickies in my terms. I mean, we're 45 years, well, more than double that. However, it made me think that Peter Burling and his team did an amazing thing yesterday morning. But of course, it started way back then. It started with Sir Peter Blake thinking that New Zealand was good enough to take on America and then doing the business. So we all inherit legacies. I more than most. So the red socks are my cue to, and I love it that Barry acknowledged Patricia Buckfield and Phil. I want to do the same. You know that Google idea about shoulders and standing on them and all that sort of stuff? I mean, that's been borrowed from somewhere else and somewhere else after that. It's so true here. This point in the history of this study, and I know that I'll be pushing up daisies and it'll be chugging along, still going from strength to strength. This study is a product of many people's efforts over a very long period of time, not least of which is the Dunedin community. So it started all those years ago, and it started on the smell of an oily rag, and was really made possible by the efforts of many people in the Dunedin community. So not only do I acknowledge Phil and Patricia, but I acknowledge all those people from that period of time, long before I came along, that made this study as superb a study as it is, because it's the foundations upon which we are now building that makes it special. We do our part in this journey to keep making it as special as we can. But if we did not have the superb foundations that were built by the people that came before us, we would not be near as good as we are. So I take my hat off to the prescience, to the hard labour, and to the love, the aroha, that went into making this what it is. The foundations are the key. We all know that that's a truism. No more true in this case. Now, for those that don't know about the Dunedin Study, and I don't presume that everyone does, that would be terribly arrogant of me, I'm going to give you a very quick overview, and then I'm going to, from that overview, segue into some key issues that, as Barry alluded to, have preoccupied me in terms of me doing well at hand on the tiller this period of time in the study's history, making sure I didn't mess it up, and then ideally making it a bit better. So there's a contemporary feel to the issues, but I can go back and forward in time easily. I've been involved, this is my 23rd or 24th year of involvement in a managerial sense. I first interviewed on this study a third of a century ago, when I was a callow youth of 22. Peroxide hair, rings on every finger, earrings, the whole deal. At age 13, they thought this guy might be interesting to 13-year-olds, because the rest of the staff were all 50 plus and wore cardis. But you'll notice at age 13, for what it's worth, is that our retention rate plummeted. Nothing whatsoever to do with me. So 1,037 babies who were born at Queen Mary in that 1 year period, April 1st, 72 to March 31, 73, and who were still resident in the greater Dunedin metropolitan area 3 years later, enrolled in the short-term child multidisciplinary study. It was only meant to run for 5 years. Clearly we can't count very well down here, but the original cohort of 1,037 was a subset, but thank goodness it wasn't a small subset, it was the majority of those people that were eligible by being resident in the Dunedin metropolitan area. 1,139 were actually still around, so 91% when approached, would you enrol in the study where we're going to try and understand how the babies who were born in adverse circumstances and were now being saved because of the increased sophistication of birth technologies that happened during the 60s, whether those bubs were faring as well as their counterparts who were not born in adverse circumstances. So age 3 and age 5 was the plan. Now, they looked at age 3 and age 5, and Phil, who was a bit of a maverick, this is the sort of guy that could sell ice to the Eskimos, he managed to parlay some findings at age 5 about hitherto unrecognised high rates of, for example, blue air, into further funding. All right, child health shock was the news at age 5, and Phil, I didn't know that Phil had a career in mind. He confessed this to me a long time ago. He said, no, this is the beauty of these longitudinal studies, you just keep on doing the same old stuff. And then I said, the same old stuff? He said, no, you know what I mean. So Phil had a twinkle in his eye way back then. He said, he thought, if I can keep this thing going, it will have value, because I've discovered some important things about health in New Zealand that were not recognised. Ministry of Health got a real kick up the tail, a real wake-up call, and a whole bunch of things have flowed from that. And I can document, point out the links to the Dunedin Study findings. As early as the first 5 years of the study. Anyway, so Phil managed to keep things going, and as you can see over here, the group of 1,037 have been followed up every couple of years when they were children, and then the inter-assessment periods begin to get a bit longer. So age 15, then we go to 3-year cycles for a couple, then we stretch out to 5, then we go to 6, and now we're on 7. Why is that? Oh, who said that? Who's that wise person out there? No, I mean, no, not really. I'll get to funding, don't worry. No, it's because the amount of developmental change that occurs, say, between 7 and 9 is quite significant, and you don't want to miss too much of a period of life where significant change is happening. Whereas the comparison between a person at 33 and 35, not much going on. I can tell you, 53 to 55, it's certainly not much going on. If there's anything going on, it's all bad, I can tell you as well. So you've got this developmental reason for stretching out. That won't always be the case. As I say, I'll be pushing up daisies and the study will be still surging along, and I imagine the interphase assessments will get smaller because the amount of developmental change, you would have another word for it possibly in the latter years, increases as well. So that's what we've done up to phase 45. We're currently in the field, hence the question marks. All right, we've been in the field for 12 weeks now. It's a fantastic stage of the assessment of the study where you're back in the field after having been responsible for ensuring that the data from the last assessment is being written up well. And you get back to the field, and that means seeing the study members, and it's a really nice time. I get to see them whenever I'm in town at morning tea or lunchtime, and they're an enormously interesting bunch of people and lovely to boot. What you'll notice over here, by the way, is what? Pretty high retention rates, yeah? In fact, if you threw up the next best in the world out here for a study of this length and type, when I say type, I'm not talking literally, because we're kind of unusual in all the things we do, but life course studies that have tried to follow a general population sample, and that's the nature of the study, it's a general population sample. It's all those bubs born in Queen Mary. No selection effects. It's not a bunch of volunteers, because they're atypical. Not a bunch of students, they're very atypical. Not a bunch of prisoners, again atypical in a different way. This is all walks of life. Remember, we've got 91%. The 9% who said no, thanks, look no different in terms of perinatal characteristics or socio-demographic factors. So we reckon we've got a really faithful snapshot of a generation of that time. And then we've managed to keep them intact, so to speak. Now, why is this important? Well, it won't surprise you, I hope, to know that the major threat to the value or validity of these sorts of enterprises is what they call non-random loss to follow-up. That means that the people that are first to drift away and hardest to get back in are not a random group. Oh, if they only were. Life would be a lot simpler. You just start with a huge number of people, let it whittle down over time, and you wouldn't get grey like me, worrying about are we going to get 90+%. But unfortunately, they're not a random group, and they're the complete opposite. These people who are hardest to find and to get back in are the people you really are interested in seeing. They are people within whom multiple difficulties aggregate. They don't have a fixed abode. They may not have a cell phone. On purpose, they may be on the run from the law. They may be in and out of institutions. They live under embankments or in the desert in Northern Territory. These are people that are hard to track and hard to retain in cohorts like these. Now, interestingly, if the next best slide was put up, it'll be about 2/3 max, probably about 60%. You know immediately then that the 60%, that the average 50 or 60% after this period of time is not a full selection of humanity anymore. It's the highly motivated, it's the high achieving, it's the compliant. It's not those hard to get and retain people in whom multiple difficulties aggregate. So most of the world's data or knowledge about human health and development is based on a rose-tinted picture, except here. We've managed to keep virtually everyone involved, and that gives us confidence in our causal inferences. What it also does is allow us to do stuff that overturns conventional wisdom or dogma. And that's always an exciting time when you say, by the way, everything that's ever been said about this or in every book is wrong. You know, it's like putting your head in the stock for stoning and having tomatoes thrown at you. But invariably what we find is once people get their head around the data and the findings, the necessary data to replicate and try it, what we have done or shown has been supported or replicated. So we're in an unusual position where we've got a general population sample, untainted by bias. We've managed to keep them all involved virtually. The 5% we haven't seen probably wouldn't bias results no matter how strong a risk factor was. All right, so it's virtually the whole cohort. By the way, when I put this up, this slide, it shocks people, you know, in the game. How the hell is that done? That's not, you know, it makes me look stupid or inept. I mean, there's a real strangeness actually about being the boss of the Dunedin Study, because people don't want to engage with you because there's sort of a set of rules for everyone else and it's different for them, so we'll discount them. One of the funny aspects of this is that I was giving a talk in North America one day, and it was a typical lecture theatre, a bit like the ones at the medical school where you have these high seating arrangements and people have a bit of wood that they lean on and write their notes on. Anyway, I heard, what's that? Geez, this is hard work. It is Wednesday night after all. That's someone's chin hitting the wood. So, I've made up a story, and some people have heard this before, but I still find it amusing. I made up a story to a bit of theory of mind. What are they thinking? Because they kind of shake their head and make all these, there's a lot of platitudes that come your way, and then they go away and they think something. And what I think they think is, Dunedin, never heard of the place before. Right, now I know it's the bottom of the South Island, and that's at the bottom of New Zealand, which is at the bottom of the world. You're getting my drift here. This is not very... But anyway, so these poor folks sit around. They're so boring down there. All they do is sit around in between these assessments, waiting to be re-enrolled because it's the high point of their life. That's how they get this remarkable retention rate. Well, no. So don't worry about the details and numbers too much. Just know that 25% of our cohort, when we last saw the complete cohort, when they were 38, lived outside New Zealand. And we all know that. I mean, you might expect that in the 20s, but this is at 38. This is approaching your 40s. So 25% live outside New Zealand. 2/3 of that group, by the way, live in the West Island, that place there. And, but look, up here, about 10%, Northern Hemisphere. Can you imagine the challenges of keeping track of people? Getting them back from wherever they are. That's only half of it, by the way. We can get people back, we can see them for a day, and I'll talk a little bit about the retention later on in more detail, but we've got to get them home safe as well. And that's not always straightforward. Human beings being human beings will go off and do all sorts of interesting things, some of which are dangerous and end them up in trouble and all the rest of it. And I, when things go bad, it always comes to me, I have a responsibility to get them back to their hearth from whence they've come. So it's a major undertaking, getting all those people back. I'll talk a little bit more about that too. Because I'm a very responsive speaker, because Steve Robertson said, would you speak about these 4 things, or touch on these 4 things? So I'm going to address them exactly, Steve. And usually people, when they get that sort of script, they kind of change it to suit themselves, but I thought I'd try and address exactly what you've asked me to address, this being one of them. How do we do this retention rate thing? But I've added a bit more to round the talk out. So, what have I said? We're a general population sample with high integrity over the longest period of time documented. And we also do, this is the third leg of the stool that makes us unique. We've also been doing from the beginning, so again, hats off to Phil and Patricia, we're doing multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary research. Mind you, everyone now wants to do that because everyone knows that, hey, the brain talks to the gut and the immune system affects the gut and the social world gets under the skin to cause cardiovascular damage. Why do we all know that now? Why do we know that you've got to do a holistic take on people? Well, among others, the Dunedin Study has shown that that is the case. But when Phil founded the study with Patricia all those years ago, I think they had to basically coin the term multidisciplinary. So every funder in the developed world worth their salt wants to prioritise multidisciplinary research. We got almost half a century start on them. Pretty good, eh? Getting to feel how these 3 factors combine to make this a very special global resource. Now this is age 38, what we used to study. So just to give you, it's a very busy slide because it's meant to subliminally convey how busy we are. What you have is a sort of classic sociological work, inequalities and all that. We have specialised programs of research, antisocial behaviour, for example. Arguably, this is the most detailed database on the development of antisocial behaviour in the world. Bar none. And I guess proof of that, I can't just blither that out there without giving you some evidence as to why that might be the case. The Queen of Sweden conferred the Nobel equivalent, the Stockholm Prize, on Terry Moffat, who leads this program of research in 2007. We have an increasing interest, as Barry has mentioned. That's why we're now in psychology, because of the importance of the brain for everything that happens in people's lives. We've been doing behavioural, mental health stuff for a long time, and that's a real strength of ours, but we also cover the physical end of the health spectrum. So this, is Murray in the audience? Murray Thompson? Murray Thompson's a professor of public health dentistry at the dental school, and he, over the last 20-25 years, has made this a unique study within itself, within that particular program of research on oral health in the world. There's no study that has data from age 5 through to that point of peak health in early adulthood, preceding studies into old age. So there's a huge gap in understanding the natural history of oral health conditions, be they periodontal disease or tooth loss or caries. All right, this is the only study that has that period of coverage. Now that could be said of a number of these disciplinary silos: respiratory health, behavioural health. If it's not the leading program of research in the world by itself in that discipline, it's up there in the top handful. But that's not what I want to convey to you. It's the fact we've got all those high quality individual disciplinary patches covered, and then we can marry them in true multidisciplinary fashion. It's an ideal setup. Right, so we've got wonderful multidisciplinary data, and you know how we get it? I alluded to it with the international slide. I said, we bring everyone back. So we don't ring them up and say, "G'day, Barry, how you going? Have you had an STI lately?" Or, "Steve, you been buffing Robin?" Or, "Sandia, how's that anxiety disorder of yours going?" Or, "Rich, whatever." We don't go out to their homes, which would be next best, all right? Because you can only take so much on the train or on the plane to someone's home. And of course, what we have is the ability, because we bring everyone back, to have experimental control, all right? We've got them in the lab. So we've got all these fancy machines, wonderfully fancy machines. But a number of the staff are here tonight and they run the machines. So you've got body plethysmographs, like the box that you sit in and you close the door and you do all these lung manoeuvres, they call them, which means a lot of strenuous huffing and puffing, and it gets all that stuff that's going on in your lungs gets translated into some computer algorithms, and you get some really good figures that come out that tell you about the person's lung health. We can hardly get the box into the new building, so of course you can't take that out into the field. You can't take a whole bunch of things we do out into the field. The sight machinery, the hearing machinery, we need a soundproof room for that. Some of the cardiovascular assessments, you can't be lugging a submaximal ergometer like the bike test you sit on out into the field, but we don't have to. We bring everyone back. So what do we have? 3 things that make us pretty special: integrity, retention, general population sample retention. Then we have breadth, multidisciplinary from the get-go. We're not backfilling, as everyone's trying to do now. You can't backfill. That's the whole point of doing prospective through time studies. You can't do it retrospectively. You miss stuff that's too important. Breadth and depth. Depth is the depth of measurement, the gold standard of measurement, direct measurement. Because in any form of measurement there's some error. The best thing you can do is to measure the phenotype or the parameter or the construct of interest directly with high quality for the field approaches. So we combine those 3 things, and that's I think what's putting us sort of at the forefront within our particular area. We can also take blood under controlled conditions, which is very helpful. It enables a number of blood-based studies. Oh, before we get on to blood, this is how we stay ahead of the curve. First real pointer to the title of the talk. In the early 2000s, we got a few reviews, all sort of coincident in time, and they said something like, "Isn't it a great study? It's a real shame they don't have more information about the family of origin, given that families of origin, either via social learning pathways or genetics, influence what happens in the next generation. But the strength of association varies by individuals or by family groups." Right, so we thought, bugger, wish we had some more. And then in typical Dunedin study, and this is, staying ahead of the curve just means rolling your sleeves up and using a bit of nous. So we rolled our sleeves up and thought, let's go back and see the parents directly. Some were not living together anymore, that was fine. We'll see them in their new abodes. Where they are living together still, we'll see them separately. Same ethical process applies wherever we see any member of a family. It's totally private between us and them. We will never tell anyone, under any circumstances, what people tell us. Interesting process, of course. You get mum and dad in different rooms answering the same questions and having different answers. I'll leave that to your imagination. Anyway, we managed to get mums and dads, most were still alive, and that was fantastic. Just lucky, really. That wasn't good planning, that was just good luck. And they reported on themselves, their spouse, their brothers and sisters, their spouses, brothers and sisters, their parents from both sides, and the siblings of the study member. So, stay ahead of the curve. Well, we wanted some stuff on the parents, but what an opportunity to get some more information. So we've got 8,000 family members reported on in our family of origin data set, and that's we call family liability. All right, so if you're doing an analysis between risk factor A and outcome B and controlling for potential third variable or influencing factor C, you'll never know whether that A to B arrow is real unless you can control for the family history, ideally. So we've got that. We've got that in our back pocket now. But we've gone the other way as well. Again, it's trying to stay ahead of the curve. We're studying the next generation of the cohort. But let me point out straight away, this is not the same study done again. Our group, remember, were unselected, right? All walks of life with no selection effects, just everyone born at Queen Mary. You could not get a more selected group of the children, could you? Because they have to be the children of these study members. So it's of very limited use. Strictly speaking, it's of no use, but I think it can point in the direction of trends to say Generation A is different from Generation B. So why are we doing it? Well, the interesting thing that we're looking at here is whether our study members transmit or pass on certain traits or attributes or abilities or lack thereof to the next generation. We're looking for continuity and discontinuity and trying to work out why there is continuity and not continuity. And that is essentially another window on mechanism. See, the main study, longitudinal study, is really about using age as your leverage point on mechanisms. Most people don't understand this. They think it's a fancy form of epidemiology where we count stuff through time. We're using age as a lever on trying to understand what might be driving associations or relationships or outcomes. And here's another way of using age but across generations as another window. You know, it's going to take 20 years, or it has taken 20 years to get the firstborn 3-year-olds, see, and they're still going. And at age 15 we see all the study members, children, so not just the firstborn, and that'll run for another 20 or 30 years because people have children at different ages. So that's a long-term investment. And what it does is augment the main study. So you can see how painstaking we can be. We're prepared to be patient. I fully expect this to be going on well after I've gone. I started this because I recognised what I'd inherited. And I thought, I want to leave this, I don't just want to not mess the study up, I want to add value, I want to add something to it. So that people that come after me can go, boy, weren't they good people back then? Sounds self-serving. I never thought it in exactly that way, but that was the motivation, was to give something back. Not for the people before me, but the people coming after me. All right, so, yeah, some biomarker studies, we draw blood. We take about 110 mils, which is not that much. It's about 1/4 if you gave blood. But we have it into different tubes. Different preparations in each tube, and it looks very ghoulish, like we're vampirish. You know, there's about 19 different tubes. But the study members are incredible. They will put up with
almost anything within reason, because they believe that they are going to help others. That's what makes them come. And I'll come back to that as well. So, staying ahead of the curve. What am I doing? Oh, you need some sort of overarching thing. Or those terrible economic speak people, they talk about a value proposition. I start to go to sleep when I hear people talking about value propositions. Please don't go to sleep when I talk about overarching themes. You know what it is? Well, we had an overarching theme when the children were young, and that was understanding child development. What about when they got in their 20s? Well, it was understanding health risk behaviour, because people were beginning to embed and develop habits that could be health promoting or destructive to their health. Now, 45, what are we doing? We're beginning to understand, or aim to understand, the processes of ageing. Because being old is an end point. The process to get there begins from conception. Now, most gerontologists will hear that and there'll be antibodies. All right? It doesn't compute. But that's what the literature says. Aging is a process of gradual breakdown, wear and tear in multiple physiological systems through time. And we've got all this interesting multidisciplinary depth data from the get-go. Wouldn't we be well positioned to study the process of aging from the beginning? Tell you what's a hard message to sell. We missed out on funding. Was it 2 years ago? Seems like an age ago. Staring down the barrel, the abyss or whatever it was you want to call it. We put in a great application. I mean, the best application I ever put in 16 years as the head. Had been funded every other time. And this time we got triaged out. We were the worst third, in the worst third. I had a lovely controlled experiment because we put the same application into an American funding agency. All other things being probably tougher. Got ranked in the top 5%. What do you reckon that's about? Who knows and who cares was my attitude. You know, you could get bogged down with that. But all you can do in those circumstances, if you want to stay in the game, to stay ahead of the curve, is just take it on the chin. I come from the school. My supervisor was a hard ass, and he taught me don't explain, don't complain, get even. All right. So when that happened, all we had to do was to pull our socks up, get through somehow. The next year, we managed to do that. Thankfully, MB came to our aid and gave us interim funding and get right back into it. I took a gamble. I thought, I'm not going to change a damn thing. All I did was add another reference. Happened to be a reference on the process of ageing that we published in that interim year. That was voted to be the fourth most important or interesting science outcome of the year. So you got to do a bit of marketing of the almost of the grubby sort sometimes. You know, you can't be precious about these things. To keep going. Now, we've got this overarching thing that links all the individual programs of research. Each one of those programs of research, cardiovascular, lung, sexual health, oral health, mental health, neuroscience, psychosocial functioning, have specialist audiences, and our researchers lead the way in their fields and contribute to those disciplinary debates and issues. Great, that's their bread and butter. But the really interesting stuff is the stuff that sits above that is multidisciplinary. The unifying theme brings them all into one place, the process of aging. Because we're talking about wear and tear across multiple physiological systems. And of course, that's what it looks like. You measure across all those disciplines to come up with an omnibus or a supra phenotype of aging. And so the paper that I just alluded to, that showed for the first time how people who are the same age actually have different biological ages. Right, so one of the beauties of the study is it's a single year cohort, so they're all 38. But their biological ages range from 28 to 61. Right, now all other things being equal, you have to say that the people that were biologically 38, say over 45, were that group most likely further down the track to be the people in the worst health, to be the people that develop non-communicable diseases like cancer and cardiovascular problems and diabetes and COPD. And that's a really big issue in the 21st century, non-communicable disease burden. Now, ageing is the most ubiquitous risk factor for developing those problems. People often conflate them and say, talk as though ageing is synonymous with having cancer and cardiovascular problems. Ageing is something independent that helps drive the emergence of those problems. So if you want to step back in the causal chain, you'd want to go to ageing. So that's why we're in a good space here. We're looking at what are the fundamentals that drive the ageing process. In our case, who's ageing too quickly? We also flip it on its head. So who's ageing really slowly or really well? Can that shed light on mechanisms as well? People talk a lot in New Zealand about deficit models and strengths models and all that sort of stuff. All of this, it's a sort of silly argument or discussion. It all sits within the risk paradigm. You either have a deficit or the other end of the continuum is a strength. So we look at both ends to try and understand why people, and our deal is not to understand to help the people that are doing really well. Why? Because they're doing really well. It's the people that aren't doing so well. We're going to try and help them. Alright, so we're identifying those at the wrong end of the continuum with a view to inform prevention, ideally, stop it, nip it in the bud before it even happens, or early intervention if it's beginning to emerge. That's our raison d'etre, is to come up with really good processes, a really good model of how things start and how they play out through time, so you can nip it in the bud, the sweet spots for intervention, to stop people ending up miserable or sick or living with disability or hurting emotionally. And it's funny when we publish papers that do exactly that, and we do some remarkable work that shows you can tell as early as 3, that I get lambasted by some members of the press and say, you've stigmatised. Why is it in this country, once you identify vulnerability and call it what it is, you are stigmatising? Because vulnerability to me is a clear signal that society or systems within society need to respond with care, aroha. You can talk about love and science, bit of love, and good effective interventions. I grow very tired of people that go, oh, you know, that's not good. And I say, why? Don't you care about these people? I just think different ways of thinking about stuff, eh? Anyway, I haven't got onto my points, have I? So, within your, as you're searching for your raison d'etre or your overarching thing, you've got to really understand your niche in your world of science. We do life course research, right? It's helped, that understanding in my case has helped because I get to review a whole bunch of international programs of research. So I'm putting on au fait with everything that's going on in my life course world. It's a small world when you break it down by disciplinary type, subtype. And I know that some people are forecasting the death of these sorts of studies. Or studies, individual studies. I know that there are applicants there that have put together 50 cohorts. And that looks pretty impressive, doesn't it? And they're going to use all 50 cohorts to nail down particular issues. Right? I should be trembling in my boots. Why aren't I? Because I know that the quality of those cohorts is not nearly as up to the quality of ours. So, but I need to understand that's the zeitgeist, that's where it's all going. So we can position ourselves so that we are working synergistically or in parallel or a step ahead to remain preeminent in our game. You can't go to sleep in this way. So you need to know your science really well. And it naturally happens because you end up reviewing stuff. That's a good thing about that process. What about your niche in the world of science? Not your science, the bigger world of science. Well, the value of these sorts of studies is seriously enhanced if you can link to the lab, or if you can link to, for example, national data sets. What I mean by the lab? Well, Steve has a lab where he can do things with mice. Right? So we make some observation about certain types of risk factors leading to certain types of outcomes. We would hypothesize a mechanism to explain that association. Disabilities Association. And then it might involve a particular neurotransmitter system. And then you might want to test specifically what part of the neurotransmitter system should be involved. And you can't do that with people for all sorts of obvious reasons, but you can do it in animal models. All right? Then you can then move from a boutique study like ours into a national data set, for example, like they hold in New Zealand called the Integrated Data Infrastructure, and test, does this apply to the population at large if they have the data available? So you want to be able to go from a high experimental control in the lab setting right out to the general population. All right, so that's the world of science that's going on, and it includes out in the population intervention research. Because after all, we claim to be helping inform interventions. But wouldn't it be nice if we had a kind of a pipeline where we go from animal models, tissue models of various sorts, our cohort in depth, out to intervention studies with at-risk groups. And that's where it's headed. So I spend about a tenth of my time talking to interventionists now. My bosses don't know that, but I know that's where I need to be. To stay at the curve. Read widely. Kostas Juma is the author of this really interesting book. Now, when I'm not watching Highlanders, the All Blacks, or Black Caps, in my spare time, I read nerdy books like this. All right? And I do it because it's pleasurable, but it also fleshes out my understanding of where things are going. This thing, Enemies of Innovation, great, fascinating book. All right? And it tells you something very important. In this game, what you do when you go to Glenroy is try and create knowledge that could be useful in a policy or practice sense to change things for the better. And when it doesn't happen, you can get very frustrated. Right? Now this book takes that apart. Why doesn't it happen? Now all of a sudden you end up in a totally different mind space when you realise that the tiny amount of difference that you've made is actually pretty exemplary given the nature of systems and institutions and how hard they are to really change. More than that in New Zealand, because I wear another hat as a Chief Science Advisor to the Ministry of Social Development and I'm part of a group of Chief Science Advisors, I know that in this country there's a very unusual opportunity where the research is going directly into Cabinet. And they're making decisions about how your money is spent. And that research is being heard around that table. It doesn't trump politics, it never will. That'd be naive to think that. But it's actually being taken very, very seriously. Special thing about New Zealand being as small as we are and having a single system, you couldn't do this in Australia because of federal and state politics to negotiate through. Very, very unusual situation, opportunity in New Zealand. But you need to read widely to be able to move in that snake-infested world. All right? And that sort of stuff, these sort of nerdy books, are both riveting to read, but they're really, really valuable to understand the broader picture and where things are going. So the next thing I'm going to read, believe it or not, I can't even believe I'm saying this, but you know, disruptive technologies, you're going to hear more and more about. There's something on machine learning. So I heard some people speak about it last week. If I've got to read that stuff, I'm a Luddite. You know, I'm having to force myself into this new world that is coming. It's like there's a big wave above us and we're all kind of going, oh, yeah, it'll come soon. It's just about to break. Anyway, horizon scanning in our game is not next year or 5 years. Think in decades. And so the way we've set up for age 45 is, in my mind, is going to be the basic structural skeleton of the next 30 years of assessments. So in thinking it through, it wasn't about here and now, it was about, is this going to be right in 20 years' time? Are we going to have the bases covered? So what do we do to make sure those bases are covered? Hearing and sight, we last did that when study members were children, they're back in. Right? The first three things are in conditions or problems listed in the top 10 problems in the world in terms of burden of disease. It's the Global Burden of Disease Project. So they're putting out papers, reports every year now. There's a big one that went from 1990 to 2015. Came out last year. Hearing, sight, chronic kidney injury, and musculoskeletal problems. The most prevalent and burdensome in terms of wrecking lives and creating misery. So why aren't we doing it? Is the question I had. And so we're going to do it, and we are doing it. And initially when I was putting this forward as must-dos, people will say, well, why don't we keep doing what we're doing? We're going to do that as well. But in 10 years' time, someone's going to say, why on earth didn't you do these 3 things? Right, so we're just trying to get, not even stay ahead of the curve, just be where we should be in this sense. Whoops, I'll take it back. So, one of the questions was about overseas investigator involvement, but I want to just slide a bit and say, hearing is Peter Thorne and Suzanne Purdy, Auckland University, New Zealand-based hearing experts. Sight, Graham Wilson, affiliated with the University of Otago, based up country, obviously a Kiwi. Musculoskeletal, Professor David Baxter, he's in the audience, I know, he was looking around talking before. There he is. He's leading this new program of research. I've wanted this to happen for a long time. Musculoskeletal was a possibility, an opportunity, and then with Dave being here, it all came together. Fantastic. Kidney function, Rob Walker. Rob and I have passed each other in the corridor for decades now. And finally, every time, now and again, he said, we need to talk about kidneys. And I go, yeah. So he's been on to it. I've been slow on the uptake. Finally, I've woken up. Chronic kidney, very important. So Rob's leading a really good team, including Zoltan Andre, who used to work at the University of Otago, now based in Sydney. Biomarkers of diet. You ask a diet person how they measure diet. You get 10 people, 10 different answers, and they'll argue about whether you can do it via self-report stuff or diaries or this or that. And every 3 or 4 or 5 years I get brave enough to go and ask another nutritionist. But I've given up. Anyway, so the right way to do this was to come up with some sort of way we can leverage the blood that we take in terms of identifying some biomarkers, but in a novel way, not doing vitamin C or D or the usual stuff. And Lisa Temaranga, very clever young researcher, has got this very clever approach to trying to understand sugar exposure. By isotoping the type of carbon that is unique to a certain type of sugar that we use a lot in New Zealand. So that's all very edgy stuff. And we're doing that. So we're trying to get the diet done well, not with all the error that comes with the normal self-report approaches. And then oxidative stress. This has been a big hole in our research as far as I can observe. And I'm a behavioural scientist, I'm a psychologist, I'm not a medic, I'm not a physiologist, but the good thing is you get to learn about all this stuff, because you have to. Because you have to know whether someone's talking porkies to you when they come through your door and say, I'm going to study this, it's the best thing since sliced bread. So I've got to get on top of all this stuff. Anyway, so I've known that Christine Winterbourne's unit up in Christchurch, University of Otago Christchurch, is a world leader in free radical biology. And I've talked to Christine over the years, can we do something? And finally, they've got the technology to do something useful. The obvious stuff, but they're also going to look at the degradation of the genome via novel approaches this time around. Right, so that's wear and tear in the oxidative stress space. So they're all New Zealanders, that's very nice, very proud of that. That's setting the scene for research programs that will grow, flourish, and interweave through time. Again, as I say, well after I'm gone, I hope. So the question I was asked, one more before stuff about overseas people. Method improvements, we use modern technologies, always trying to keep ahead of the curve there. So psychology was very kind to me, and they gave me $140,000 to buy a fancy machine. It takes pictures of people's eyes and tells you about the depth or the layering of the nerve cells behind the retina. The idea being that if you've got thinner layers or fewer numbers, fewer layers, you are at greater risk for neurodegenerative disorders down the track. All right, so that's an easy test to administer. It's not invasive. We don't open people up. Costs a bit of money, but boy, that data is going to be invaluable. Straight away, but through time. So, reasonably costly though. It's really hard to get money for equipment. You don't get it from Thunder. They don't pay for equipment. You've got to get it from your host institutions. And of course, everyone wants something. And money doesn't grow on trees. So, and we were lucky. Some of this equipment, new equipment that we really desperately needed was paid for by the Prime Minister's Prize. Right, that's 500 million? No, 500 million. Wouldn't that be awesome? 500,000. 400 of which was meant to go to research. And so a lot of equipment was covered off by that. Dream type equipment. Checking as we go. So we know a lot about the study members already. So when we, for example, do their blood pressures, now we can quickly check that these things are within the range we'd expect with 7 years age. Right? If we're getting anomalous findings, we know there's something wrong with our assessment. So it's a QA approach, using data rather than just observing that interviews we do now. We actually link it to previously held data, and we do that in real time. When I say real time, every 2 or 3 weeks we have a look to make sure things are as we would expect. So there's all sorts of ways of making sure that the data acquisition is high quality. Getting everyone on the, now that's a typo. I was going to say getting everyone on the same page, but it's actually quite fortuitous in so much, because basically what I'm trying to say is making sure we're all cut from the same cloth. Right, so a whole bunch of new people, I told you about 5 groups, they need to get together with the silverbacks, so to speak, those aging with the study, some disgracefully, some okay. Right, we need to all get on the same page, and we'll do that by getting everyone together in the new year. This assessment phase will run until the end of 2018, at least. So halfway through, temporally wise, get everyone together and start to acculturate how you think about analysing the data, the new folk. Because there's a special set of tricks or knacks or approaches that people need to learn. And it's not self-evident. It's not a simple matter of going from this design into this space. It's hard-won, that knowledge. So we want to share that around amongst the group. And of course, we can start analysing stuff long before we finish. We'll have 50 to 60% of the data by early. Is that telling me I've got 2 minutes left? I'm only just clearing my throat. I realise the time's up. So we can start to run analyses. In other words, we will know what will come out in 2020 and where it will make a splash, or may not make a splash, by June, July next year, 2018. All right, once we start down that path, by the way, we knock our findings around. We try and make them go away. We get a lot of scrutiny these days because we've got a reputation for doing good work. And when I say we try and make the findings go away, we try and undermine ourselves. We try and shoot holes in what we've done so we're not rock solid. So when someone out there in the world who wants to have a go, and there are a number that now make a living, not make a living, that's exaggeration, but who enjoy greatly having a crack at us, when they do their stuff, we know that what we've presented to the world is rock solid. We're not heady about things. We don't think, oh, name and lights, just rush ahead and publish something. Quite the reverse. Quite conservative in that sense, quite old-fashioned. Okay, so this is my first question from the board, the group that asked you. How do we establish collaborations and buy-in? What do we get out of our international collaborations? Because this is an international consortium. We've got 2 very long-term, 3 actually, 3 long-term players. One started in New Zealand, Malcolm Sears, been at McMaster in Canada for about 20 years. And Terry Moffat and Sean Casby based at Duke in America. They also have an appointment at King's College in London, so we can draw on the map direct links with key players to Europe and to the States. Is that good? Yes, it is. The cutting edge, believe it or not, is not always found in New Zealand. So, you need people on your team, because the world's a highly competitive place, who are living out there in the world where the cutting edge may be, doing recognisers, engaging, hearing the stuff, feeding it back. All you've got to be is out there. Every time I go overseas, I learn a lot, just walking past and being told stuff. It's amazing sometimes the gulf between what the chit-chat here is and what the chit-chat over there is. Not in all cases, but you need to be linked to the world of science. And that's what these people can bring. Not a back foot link, which is here with some mates over there. People who are heavily invested because of their long-term career commitment to the study, who have the study's best interest. You don't have to be selfish. It could be selfish reasons, but therefore, because of selfish intent or self-motivation, the study will benefit. Benefits include also I mean, when you this is never, when you are living and working at an Ivy League university, you get a really good crop of students coming through. Postdocs. A lot of people compete to go to Duke, for example. So you can set up almost a convivial factory-like situation where bright postdocs are put to work on banging out papers that really matter. Because individuals only have so much time. And once you've got a few years on the clock, your role's better managing and directing rather than doing the grunt work. Right? So we can tap into, in other words, I don't want to sound too mercenary, I'm just trying to be objective and tell you the truth. We can tap into some of the best young brains in the world because of these connections. We've got plenty of really brilliant people in New Zealand too, but it just enlarges the pool. A good thing. Also, we're not paying for it. Okay, you have links to model water coolers around. So there's all that formal stuff that goes on, but the really interesting stuff, particularly overseas, is the stuff that is whispered, either at conferences after too many drinks, or around the water cooler within various shops. Right? I'm thinking, oh, well, I noticed this. Did you know about? What can you tell me about? Have you ever seen? All right, so having that overseas connection can bring those fresh insights in real time to us here, and it's helpful. Cultural differences do occur. New Zealanders are different from Australians. Australians are different from Canadians. We're all different from Americans. Right? Brits are different. All right, so you've got to manage those. All right. The idea of being in charge of something like this is not you're not in charge, you're kind of a guardian. And what you want to do, the classic stuff is what Dalton did, pick a good team for the yachting and let them go. All right? So you can't get flustered by people with big egos. Academia is full of that. All right? But some egos are wanted, some not. So you do a balancing act. So big ego versus great output, you manage it. Big ego, loud mouth, no output, that's a different form of management. All right, so this is just people politics. It happens in every sphere of life. Cultural differences make it sometimes a quite challenging and nuanced sort of situation you've got to think hard about, as opposed to in your own culture, you just know instinctively what's going on and what the right guidance might look like will be. Okay, how do we achieve the high follow-up rates? Good systems, good staff, good relationships. Wow, rocket science, eh? So what is it? Well, fundamentally it's the goodwill of the study members. It's an unbelievably special reservoir of goodwill that exists in this group of 1,000 people and their families. I doubt whether it will be repeated again in the world. If we started this today in Dunedin, I don't think this would be achieved 45 years later. This all began before user pay. It began, I remember the jingles, God's Own Country, all right, back in the 70s. We're a softer, kinder, gentler people then, right? But that's the beginning only. Every time we see our study members, we have a chance to strengthen that commitment or screw it up, right? So I'll get to some more specifics about how that can go off here wrong in a second. What we have here is good systems, logical, very in-depth systems. We've got a lot of information on where people have been and lived and where their friends and family live. Great staff, and a number of them are here today, so we pick really, probably if I ask a staff member tomorrow, do you realise what we're really picking on selecting you for a staff? It's EQ, all right? Social intuition. So given that they've got the competencies, so we're looking for people with social intuition who can relate to all walks of life, because that's what the study is, without being judgmental, being respectful, with kindness, with the ability to do things on the hoof, because we can give them so much prescriptive stuff as to how you do things, but human beings will throw left field stuff at you all the time. So we've got a fantastic staff. I think every time we do this, we get a fantastic staff, and this seems to get better and better. It's like, what was that guy Samaranch talking about the Olympics, the best ever? I'm sure, I can see why he said that, because it does seem to be the best ever intake now. Really great people, and they are the coalface, not me, not other people, research manager or data manager. These are the people who do the interviews. And as I was alluding to before, one sour note, one bad performance, one hangover, one whatever, can begin the rot. And you'll see 95 come down to 91, then 83, and it'll go on. Because people talk to each other, the study members. So, highly professional staff who know what they're doing, trained to criterion, quality assured throughout, supported, do the job, which is a very human one, interacting with other human beings and asking them all sorts of incredibly private and sensitive stuff, as well as measuring them in all sorts of ways. So it's not the fact that we do these things, because it's all common sense. The relationships are very important. I think of the relationship with the study members as being the most important thing in the whole study. I'm not talking about being nice to people, that's a given. Being respectful to people, that's a given. I'm talking about us working our butts off to do good things with what they give us through that 8 hours plus, and then showing them via the media, you have to dance with that devil from time to time, that what they've done has mattered. What they've contributed has made a difference. They get a real kick out of that. They feel very proud to know that they've helped others. And that's their prime motivation to come. They don't get much in return apart from our gratitude. I mean, you might have said it's a perk to be flown back from London, when they were 21, but not at 38, cattle pass. Someone's done it recently, right? It's purgatory, all right? But they do it because they believe it will help others. It's not what we do, it's how we do it. So it's an attitudinal thing, and I think people can read each other pretty well. And so the study members know that they feel it, that we respect them and we value them. There are millions of component parts to that being real for them. And we think very hard about how to achieve that. And we never rest on our laurels. We always keep trying to be better. And we make mistakes, but we try and learn from them. And if there's been a faux pas, I will always try to be very honest. Because people love honesty. They'll forgive you a lot if you're honest. If you try and bullshit them, you've lost them. All right, and as for the retention rate, well, I start from 100. I'm not limited. I'm not weighed down by, if we could only get to 70. Because I've been there. I know it can be done. So I start from 100. When we get to 80%, everyone's buggered. And if we can't get another single person through us, we'll have a meeting, and we say, right, set the clock back. If anyone likes cricket, when you get to 50, when you get to 100, you set the clock back if you're a good batsman. Back to 0. We set the clock back, and we start again. And it happens it's much harder, it's much slower, but we get there, bit by bit by bit. Right, so you set the sights high, and you strive hard to get there. And when people say you can't do that, that's exactly where you go and try and do it. Challenges with consent. Do unto others is the really complicated motto that guides us. All right, that was Phil's belief. I have bought into that 100%. Doing unto others, that's very trite and easy to say. Doing it is bloody hard. That means you've got to put yourself in other people's shoes and walk not just for a kilometre or two, walk for a week or two in their shoes and understand what their world is like. Then think about whether we should be doing X or Y. Ethics committees are great, I love them. A lot of people see them as a hurdle. I love it because they add value. But they can't legislate for real ethical behaviour. No one can. One example, age 26 when we set up the DNA data bank, there was a TV program halfway through the assessment on cloning, because Dolly the sheep was big news. And people, it sounds a bit funny to say, but people say, are you going to clone us? Yeah, but it was a good question, a reasonable question. And this was in the context of whether they should give blood or not, because that's how we got the DNA. And it became very obvious to me immediately, almost, that with other study members in the room during the consent process in the morning before we start, and that all ticked the box, not a problem, that I could subtly, by virtue of my neutral and accurate and objective response, set up a coercive situation where the person felt that they should try and give blood. I would explain away all the anxieties and leave it hanging. The dynamic was such where there was a genuine pressure, subtle pressure, but pressure nonetheless. So I resolved to go in and when I had these types of questions, say, we don't really care if you give blood or not. Right? Not a big deal if you want to change your mind either way during the day, whatever. It's totally up. It's a bonus if we get it. Now, if I was incredibly bright and Machiavellian, this could have been a really clever strategy because we ended up getting more people giving blood because they had no pressure than we would have normally. Because I know what was done the last time. Of course, I'm not dumb, but I'm not Machiavellian like that. It was a genuine attempt by me, with no one watching, no one guiding, to do the right thing. Because I thought, what would I like? That's what will see you through the rough times, that sort of behaviour, that way of thinking. That's how you stay ahead of the curve. Nothing fancy about that. But you've got to do this balancing act the whole time. Ageing, of course, brings all sorts of challenges. In this case, we've got people who at 45 begin to develop some early signs of the sort of diseases that or risk factors at least, the diseases I mentioned earlier. What do? Do we let them know? We have a very clear contract with our study members. We'll intervene in their lives under two conditions. One, when there's an imminent threat to themselves or imminent threat to others. This was conceived of at a time where the main challenge or concern was psychiatric problems or expressions of a desire to be violent. I'm going to go and kill myself when I get home, or I'm going to go and beat my wife up or my child. But as people of age, we have to broaden the remit of this idea, so harm to self or others, to include physical health problems. So we have a threshold set, high threshold, not just a normal clinical cut. So blood pressure is 90 or 130 or 140 depending on who you are. Above that you've got hypertension. We don't cut at that point, we cut at 180 for systolic, the higher one. And that number is given to us by our consultant cardiologist, Michael Williams, local lad. And that enables us to, with a good conscience, know that we're doing the right thing by our study members, but we're not letting anyone walk out of our lab situation, our research situation, and go on unknowingly with a risk, a serious risk. Not imminent, they're not going to drop dead of a heart attack tomorrow, but what we do is we write to them and say, you need to go on to your GP and get this checked out, because on the day you came, it was hard. That's a moving feast. All right? That will change through time. As we get more biomarkers, we'll have more decisions to make. How many have we got? Barry said this amount. That's a small amount. All right, so maintain a fine balance. Now, I'm almost there. Have we made an impact? This is another question I was asked. Have we made an impact beyond the academic bubble? Yes, in Wellington being code for politicians and policymakers. I can think of a couple of examples. So I was on a panel that wrote a report about how they should fix SIFs, and the way to do that was a radical solution. Completely forget about the old system that's broken. Let's start with a new ministry and give it a new mandate and a new way of operating. So there were 6 of us on that panel, and I was the academic nerd. Right? So I was the one that spoke about evidence. Right? I spoke about evidence from the Dunedin Study because I could. I also spoke about other evidence, sort of parochial in that sense. But that was a very useful input into that process that led to the biggest change in the social sector for 45 years, according to the Chief Executive Ministry of Social Development. So that's impact. What about outside New Zealand? Well, I was part of a junket that went to the European Union. It was just the week before Brexit vote happened, actually. It was a very interesting place to be in Brussels. And we sold New Zealand's integrated data infrastructure and the social investment paradigm that sits around that as a unique opportunity for Europe to learn something about how you can use data to make social policy. The Dunedin Study and its linkage to the national data sets is one of the examples that was given that they seem to really resonate. Anyway, that led to a bilateral relationship between the European Union and New Zealand signed by the Prime Minister earlier this year. Those are nice for politicians, not because of bragging rights, but because in international diplomacy, bilateral relationships allow you to have legitimate conversations just with one other partner. It doesn't always have to be science on the table, if you get my drift. Social sector, so science advisors, and this is linked, not directly with study stuff, get to evaluate all the social sector budget bids for evidentiary basis. And we get to say, no, that should be funded, no, that doesn't. We're not always listened to, but we can be influential there. And of course, I'm bringing what I know from the Dunedin Study into that context, because what we do is so relevant to the New Zealand situation and policy formation. And the social investment paradigm, that is what's been talked about in Wellington. You identify those most at risk with a long set of costs and misery, human suffering associated with that risk profile, compared to other people that look similar on the surface but don't have that long risk profile. You intervene because you haven't got all the money in the world with those people with the highest forward liability, is what they call it. And you give the people that are the hardest to deal with, that are often neglected by the system because they're too tough, you give them the Rolls-Royce intervention, which will reduce costs on society and it's assumed reduce suffering for that person, their family and farm. Right? That's life course. That's the Dunedin Study. And I'm involved in a number of conversations right now which may have real benefits if it goes the way it seems to be going for the population in terms of mitigating that vulnerability I talked about earlier. That 20% of the population who, for whatever reason, often no fault of their own, are struggling and need a hand up. So yes, all small advanced economies agree that it's very near impossible to measure impact in individual settings in academia. I mean, people are trying all over the world right now, but yes, scientists can have impact. And you see it in New Zealand. Threats to managing risk. We've got to be Peter Berlin, keep a cool head as we get more and more interesting data. We can't let it go to our head. We need to stick to our knitting, not get carried away with the latest fetish or interesting thing. Academic hubris often gets in the way of doing the right thing by research participants. We need to be mindful of that. And we need to be aware of the changing landscape for data. See, journals are where we publish our information. They want to have our data now. My contract, or our contract with study members, is no one apart from people in the Dunedin Study with access to their data. They really like that. They feel assurance. Funders are not going to give us money anymore unless we give data away. So you see, this is a train wreck coming. This is a real tension. I mean, the stated reasons for doing this are good. Assuring transparency and reproducibility. All right? But who's to say that journals are safe places for the data? Who's to say that the funder gets to dictate that? Isn't the centre of gravity with the study members? It's their lives. So don't they have a say? So I'm engaged in that process. We're trying to work this one through right now. Future. One more minute. Future. We need to nurture now. Staying ahead of the curve, the next generation, including the leadership. So there's a person in this room who I think should be the next director. And time will tell. It won't be my choice, it'll be my governance group. But my responsibility is to ensure that she gets all the experiences and exposure she needs to be able to step up when required. Same with all the other key lead researchers. They need to be thinking about who should replace them. I talked to one of my senior colleagues a few months back and said, what's your transition situation? And she said, you. So I'm betwixt, I'm only 54, and I'm thinking about my successor, but I'm meant to stay in the game for much longer. Unless I go under a bus. But I'm not thinking like that. I need to just think about who's going to take this thing over. You know what will determine and has determined my thinking about this? It's values. It's not about academic competency or EQ or whatever. It's about values, because this is now a national and international resource to Tonga. You need a person with the right values who will put the study first, not their academic personal interests. And she's sitting over there, and she'll do that. Funding challenges. Now, Right, funding's always a problem, and just to cut through this, philanthropy is an option in New Zealand. It's still in its infancy. So what have I done? This is how you stay at the cutting edge. You don't sit around thinking about it or talking to people that do it. You go and become part of it yourself. So that's why I'm the co-chair of the Plunkett Foundation, which is trying to raise money for Plunkett. All right? I like to get your hands dirty, get my own experience so I can make up my own mind about how one can pursue this particular avenue if that's worth pursuing. I've only managed to raise, it was $5 million startup. The group that we're with have only managed to raise $500,000 so far. It's bloody hard to raise money asking people to dip into their pockets. So that's not really a viable option in its current state in New Zealand. Better by dissemination. Who saw the series Why Am I? You like it? Yeah. Yeah, great. So did a lot of other people. I've had people come up to me in airports. In fact, I had a person this year in Rarotonga come up to me in a coffee shop and say, you're the guy that makes people cry. And I thought, I think that's a good thing. And then she proceeded to tell me, and break down in tears, a whole bunch of stuff from her family history that was now being talked about in their family as a result of having watched that series. So somehow, and I never expected this, we legitimised people to talk about hard stuff, vulnerability and the like. So that was a much better outcome than I ever anticipated. So we need to do more of that. We need to partner more, and that's it. The whole thing, boiled down, is about trust. The study members are it. If we treat them well, strengthen that bond of trust, that special trust. I haven't talked about what they tell us. It's unbelievable what they tell us. They tell us, anecdotally, that I've never spoken to another human being about this. All right, they trust us. What a responsibility they have. We need to live up to it, and we need to keep everyone that doesn't respect that trust at bay. Doesn't matter who they are. Journal editors, funders, line managers, critics, protect those 1,000 people, those special people. Because they are the study. And we, as researchers, are just lucky enough to be along for the ride. Thanks a lot.